And Angus Ferguson from Middleton Ross Solicitors. Thank you for tuning in today, Monday the 22nd of September. As we are getting into the autumn months, I thought it would be a good opportunity to review life admin and what you could really do to help manage your affairs and put your affairs in order for future proofing generally. So there are a few things I wanted to discuss with Angus today. In the past, we've carried out Q&A sessions for frequently asked questions and also for questions that people have submitted to us as well. But today, we're just going to have a discussion over some of the main topics and see where the discussion lies from there. It's no fixed format on that, so but there are a few key topics that we want to talk about. The first one would be to discuss wills, the second would be powers of attorney, and the third would be mortgage securities and what you might need to do to update those, to tidy up your title deeds, etc. So as I said at the start, we've got autumn approaching now, and it's probably a good time of year to think about doing an MOT on your life admin, and that MOT would include checking to see where your title deeds are, how does that tie in with everything else that you've got, which does flow into, do I have a will, do I need to review the will, and do I need to do a power of attorney, is that already in place, where is it currently undergoing registration, etc. So I think we'll go with we'll start with mortgage securities, Angus, and I think it's probably worth stripping that down to the very basics, and we can explain what is a mortgage security. Do you want to start that off, please?
Sure, thanks, John. And like you said, with an MOT, about the mortgage securities, it's about avoiding unwanted surprises or any nasty surprises. And so about that is when you do obtain a mortgage on your property, the bank or the lender will typically have a security on that property, and that is the mortgage, and that essentially does need to be discharged eventually, once that's paid off, or when you do sell the property eventually. And a lot of the time, the mortgage can be fully paid, but it's still on the title deed, and it doesn't come off automatically. And
so what would you do if you knew that you were coming up to the end of your mortgage and you knew that the final payment was coming soon? How do you kind of celebrate that?
Well, I mean, one obviously no more payments, happy days. But one thing you may want to do is actually just to organise an appointment with your solicitor, because there will be paperwork involved in arranging to have that discharge, that mortgage taken off, and that would involve the lender signing a discharge, and at the same time, understandably, probably a lot of water's gone under the bridge. There would have been some time that's gone by since you first obtained that mortgage. So, things need to be checked, like, is the lender still operating? Have they changed names? Whether it can be a paper or a digital mortgage, or a digital discharge, sorry. And, there's different processes to go about it. And it also depends on the lenders. Some of the lenders may automatically have processes where they actually do contact you or discharge it automatically, but in our experience, some of them don't, and you actually need to take proactive action to contact them. And
who would do that, Angus?
I mean, we could do that, and that's why it's a good idea to actually get in contact before you've made that final payment, just to see what you need, what paperwork, what identification, if anything's changed in the title deeds, with the ownership or such.
Okay, well, what do you think, from your experience, a title deed would look like, or a title deed pack would look like, and how would someone know if they still have a mortgage security over the title to the house?
Well, typically you'd do a search from the title deeds, and you'd obtain the most current version of that, and it would explain how the ownership is structured and whether that's changed, whether there's a survivorship, whether the ownership is jointly with someone else. And it will also then show, the securities that are held over the property, and it'll name the bank, it'll name when that security was lodged, and and it also will list the amount that the property was obtained.
Okay. Say I bought a house 10 years ago, and I had a Halifax mortgage taken out at the time that I purchased that house. And in 10 years' time, I came into an inheritance, and that allowed me to pay off my mortgage earlier. As I'm going to make that last payment, what do you think I should do as a potential client?
Well, that's a good question. I would certainly encourage that said client to get in touch with us firstly to prepare that paperwork. But I'm just thinking, in terms of, could you explain it further?
Yeah, of course. You would, as the potential client, they would be paying the mortgage directly. You pay that off in monthly payments, of course. But you might say you came into an inheritance and you had £20,000, for example, to pay off, and you had 20k left on your mortgage.
Yeah.
You would go to, you would probably let the bank know that you're planning to do this. But mortgage lenders allow you to make big overpayments from time to time. You're allowed to pay. Typically, you're allowed to pay a percentage of your mortgage, say 10% of your mortgage back in any 1 year. Otherwise, you'll start to get early repayment charges and such like. That might or might not happen with your last one, but it's worth contacting the bank probably first of all as you're going to do that in that scenario. But once you've done that, once you've made your payment and you know it's going to be paid off, the bank are going to write to the client to say, this has been your final payment. You should go to see a solicitor to deal with tidying up your title deeds, and they'll use the phrase to discharge our security. When I started in the job here, there were some banks who would do the discharge for the client straight away, and we wouldn't have to do that. I think that might have been part of their mortgage package at the start, but we're no mortgage brokers here, but I've not got any experience of mortgages these days where they'll automatically discharge it for you. You tend to need a solicitor to do that. But clients might not know what to look for, and whether or not they still need that. If they didn't have that letter coming in from the bank, they might just say, well, that's the final payment, if for whatever reason that letter goes missing in the post. But I think that's why it's important to approach a solicitor. If you've never used a solicitor for a long time, you have probably used one to buy a house for you if you've got a mortgage security in the first place. But if you've not used one since then you can go to any practice really, and they should be able to help you. Of course, that's the type of thing that we do on a daily basis. And we can have a look to see what your title deeds records are. If I can explain just a little bit more on that, you've got your title deeds can be in two main systems. So a few minutes ago I suggested that I bought a house 10 years ago with a Halifax mortgage. So that house will be on the modern land registry system. So I guess you as my solicitor, you would be able to, with the knowledge that it was a relatively recent transaction, i.e. in the last 20 years, then you'd be able to easily go on, as a solicitor, you'd be able to go on to our online Registers of Scotland portal and download a copy of the title sheet, and that will show the entries for that'll show who owns it, which would be you in that situation or me in that situation, how much you paid, and it would show any outstanding mortgage securities. So it's quite often the case where the final mortgage payment has been made, but the discharge has not gone through. So further down the line, if for any reason your solicitor would look at your title, it would always show that there was an outstanding security there, and it's often the case where it gets missed further at the time that the mortgage repayment is made. That's not the end of the world. It can always be caught up with. So
I suppose you don't want it, when you're getting to that final point of actually selling that property, and that's when you become aware of it. It has the potential to hold it up.
Yeah, potentially. If you don't have the records of the mortgage at the time, then it could potentially hold things up. So it is better to deal with it as and when you get the mortgage repaid fully. But it's not. It's definitely not the end of the world if it has to wait until later on. If you bought the house, say 30 years ago, and your mortgage was paid off 20 years ago, but nothing was ever done with it, then the title is more likely to be in the old-fashioned Sazing system, which is more deeds-based rather than map-based, and it's not really digital. It's more based on your old-fashioned bundle of deeds, showing a succession of who's owned that property from when it was built through to today, and on top of that bundle would be a copy of the bank's security that you would have signed as you took over that mortgage when you bought the house. That is a paper security that would need to be discharged by us, by the bank through us, on a paper process. So we would have to look at that bundle of deeds, prepare a new discharge document. We would send that to the mortgage lender, make sure that they're happy that the mortgages are paid off. They would sign that new deed, and then we would get that recorded at the Registers of Scotland. That's part of the process that we do, and that's part of the service that we offer. So title deeds are worth looking at generally if you've got a mortgage repaid, and it's time to look at what to do with the old mortgage security, and the aim is always to try to discharge it at that time. It's also a good time to review, as I mentioned at the very outset. It's a good time to look at an MOT over your life admin generally. And so what else can we look at then if at the point that we're going to be dealing with the mortgage security, what else could the client look at to see to check, just to make sure everything's in place?
Well, I think certainly when a client does, come into whether it might be an update of a will or a new will, that's the time when I understand, it's a good time to have a look at the title deeds. So they both come, and it might be the other way around. And at the same time, from that perspective, it's also a brilliant time to look at a power of attorney. I know we're probably not going to move on to that yet. If you want to just look at wills, but it's better to tackle these things, as early as possible when everything is in good order. But whether it is doing a will for the first time or updating it, it's always important to look back and review these things, because in particular case for a will, circumstances change over time. You may have done a will several years ago and obtained property, and in that case, that would be a perfect time to look at the title deeds, and whether also in that time, you've been married, you've had children, how that property will pass on after you pass away, or if you have a share of that property, how that would pass on. And I know that there's certain, terminology and law in Scotland in terms of how that can, and I know in Scotland, you have the option of a survivorship, and that would be a survivorship provision, and that would be reflected in the title deeds, and that essentially would mean that upon your death, your share of the property would automatically pass to the spouse, and that is clearly illustrated in the will, in the title deeds, and it can potentially have significant ramifications, if there's children involved or other people you would have intended under the will for your share of the property to pass on to.
Not every household is married with 2.4 children these days. I wonder, say I originally owned the house myself, and then I took out a mortgage as I bought that, and I was single at the time, but then I had a partner, and then I've got a child with that partner, but the mortgage and the security is still in my name, and then I've come to the point where I've discharged that mortgage as I've paid it off. What would I want to consider when I go to my solicitor? What would I want to do? What would I want to think about if I've got a partner and a child and the partner's not on the title with me?
Well, I think that would be, a perfect opportunity to look at potentially adding your partner to the title, for their own security. And also it's a good opportunity to, if you haven't prepared a will before, it's a prime opportunity to do that.
What would I do with my will, Angus, in that circumstance? What would you do? What would you offer? What do you suggest as a solicitor to a client in that circumstance?
Well, I would, certainly recommend, including that partner as part of your will, in terms of who you would pass your, at the moment you're currently the only owner of the property. So you'd want to ensure that, that it passes on to them and that they're taken care of.
That's right. So I was thinking along the lines of if I died, leaving a partner behind and a child, and I didn't make a will, there are implications with that because the partner wouldn't automatically be entitled to anything when I've not got a will.
And did you say we're unmarried?
Unmarried.
Okay, yeah. So, this estate would fall into intestacy, and it's not crystal clear whether the partner would, be able to would inherit the property per se, and depending on the age of the child, and there's other ramifications there. Whereas that can be dealt with a lot easier if the title deeds were changed and if there's a will.
Yeah, completely. So, but if you are married and you've got and the title is in joint names, and say there's a survivorship in the title, and it means that if one dies, the other automatically inherits the house, it's still worthwhile to have a will and to review your will if you've got one already at the time that you've paid off your mortgage, because it all kind of ties in with each other. But you want to make sure that what your will says is broadly in line with what the title deed says.
Yes.
An example might be that the title might have a survivorship where the house automatically passes to the other person named on there, but your will might say something else. So your will might say, I leave my half share in my house to my brother instead of my spouse, or something like that. Say it was a family home that was inherited by one side of the family. If you've got a survivorship in place, that wouldn't work because the survivorship works over what the will says. So it's if you want to pay off your mortgage and you need to have a solicitor to deal with that part, I'll just re-emphasize it's a great time to look at everything as a whole, I think. And in terms of what you do with your will, you should have an executor appointed. That's one of the key things you do with a will, and the executor is a person that you trust to manage your affairs when you go. They can either be in the family or the person who you are naming to inherit. You might just say, I leave everything to a certain individual. They can also be the executor, that's no problem. But an executor is a totally different thing from being an attorney under a power of attorney, and I think it might be worth talking about that too, Angus. Just before I let you talk about that, I just want to emphasise as well that when it's often very worthwhile having both a will and a power of attorney. The reason why is that everyone's guaranteed in life to die at some point.
Yep. So
having a will in place to reflect your wishes is important for when you pass on. But not everyone is guaranteed in life to actually need their power of attorney to be used, but you never know what's around the corner. So it's definitely something that you should put in place. And what you say in your will doesn't cover what can be done in a power of attorney, because the power of attorney it allows someone to make decisions during your lifetime, whereas a will decides what happens when you die, and they don't cross, they sit side by side with one another. So the power of attorney during your lifetime is there to be used if it needs to, but then it comes to an end. It comes to an automatic stop when you die, and that's when your will would kick in. So I wonder what's worth thinking about for a client if they were to come in to make a power of attorney with us, Angus.
Certainly, thanks, John. Well, something important to consider is that you actually can lose the ability to have a power of attorney or have one made, once you've lost capacity. So that's why it's so important to do this early, and when you are well and you are coherent, and you can make those decisions.
Do you mean that if a client was elderly,
yes,
and was maybe beginning to lose their faculties a bit, and then they've got a family member who might say, what we're going to do, we should probably do a power of attorney now. Is it too late to do it at that time?
Well, it depends, how far someone has cognitively declined. I mean, that is the decision that we can make, independently, but often we'll rely on a doctor to do that. But that is a rare situation, and it's something that you really want to avoid as much as possible, because with a will, as John mentioned, it's important to appoint an executor. That's like a critical thing, and often the executor can also act as the attorney, as someone's attorney. But we often recommend that someone actually appoints maybe two executors or a substitute executor, just in case that executor is unable to act, or they've predeceased, or they're just not present or unable to do it. So and often that's the same case with an attorney. And with that, when you can appoint an attorney, and there are a number of powers that attorney has over you, and in terms of those powers, whether they're financial and welfare, we can go into that differently, but separately, sorry. But so the attorney, often, as I mentioned, you can have one or more attorneys, and those attorneys can act jointly or separately, and it is a separate document, that can be done at the same time. Sorry, and what else were you saying? That was my train of thought there.
That's fine, no problem, Angus. I was going to ask you a very simple question. What's the difference between an attorney in Scotland and an attorney in the United States?
Oh, well, an attorney in the United States is basically a legal practitioner.
A bit like what we are doing right now.
Yeah, that's right. An attorney just has the power, some financial and welfare powers over another individual, and they're able to make decisions on their behalf. And
whereas an attorney in the States is a lawyer, but an attorney in Scotland is someone who uses a power of attorney.
Yeah, and the power of attorney document itself lists quite an exhaustive list of powers that person is given, and it is that's something that we would sit you down and go through with to ensure that you understood all those powers that you'd be granting, and it can be up to you whether that's limited or whatnot. But
Angus, you've gone through lots of powers of attorney with clients in the couple of years that you've been to with here, and the standard document that we produce for clients, it's got a big list of different financial powers covering day-to-day banking, paying your expenses, and then you to bigger ticket items like dealing with your house, or allowing your attorney to deal with professionals, bankers, solicitors, accountants and such like. And then there's the welfare sides, which covers decisions to be made about your care and accommodation and such like. Is there any particular, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Angus, thinking of all the different powers that we usually put in the power of attorney documents for clients, is there any that always draw interest to you and think in how they might be applied to for a client?
Yeah, that's a good question. A few of them that sort of always strike me, and I've had pointed out a couple of times, potentially, I suppose, in the financial sphere, maybe the ability to make gifts, for example, on behalf of the the grantor. I mean, that's one idea.
I think it's worth
Yeah.
discussing that point just now then, because having a person who gives the power of attorney to another person, so it might be a husband giving it to their wife or then to their children. If we are looking at the spouse and children scenario, most families in that situation, they'll either add in the other spouse and then the children after that, or they might have everyone together. But in any case, the usual power of attorney that we would make for a client in that situation includes the power for that person to give gifts, as you say.
Yes.
And is it a good thing to have that in, and why would it be a good thing for a client to have that?
Well, a lot of the time, I suppose it would depend on the relationship and whether that may have been a consistent, I suppose, pattern. Whether the gifts were given in the past and whether that was something normal. But it's obviously a dangerous area that that potentially is a recipe for disaster if it's abused. But often I think that it's really important to have that discussion in advance, and it is something that can be removed from the power of attorney, the document itself, can it not? I mean, yeah, that, or limited at least. But again, it's something that one potential way to get around it per se is that, say, as if you had two children that were acting as attorneys, you may require them. They may only be able to make such decisions jointly, where both would have to sign off on it, for instance, if for certain But then the cost of that is that for every financial move that needs to be made on that person's behalf for their benefit, then both would need to sign off on it. Whereas it's a lot more accessible, a lot easier to use if there's just one attorney or both, so they can act jointly or separately. But these are just the things you need to think about.
Those are usually discussion points that we have with our clients when they come in and say that they want to consider making a power of attorney. And before we would draw it up, we would like to make sure that the clients know what exactly it is that they do, because there tends to be, as you say, two main options with a power of attorney when you're giving it to more than one person. Do they have to do things strictly jointly? Do they do it? Can they work on it individually as well? And the flexibility is a popular choice these days, I think, because if, say, you're not granting it to children and they might not be in the same place at the same time, so it can be an advantage to allow them to work separately and then come together if they really needed to. But on the flip side, it can be worth having them making decisions jointly, so that you as the grantor of the power of attorney, you've got some assurance that whatever decision's being made is being made by your children unanimously from that point.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And if you look at it from the perspective of the financial powers as well, with quite significant decisions, whether that may be going into care or something like that. Having if there's two attorneys to make those decisions jointly, I believe a completely reasonable decision. And also in terms of what you just said then in regards to flexibility and what the document provides, with those financial powers, you actually do have the option to make those powers operative upon registration of the document, which means in terms of accessibility and such.
What could you break that down a little bit, Angus? What would that mean? So
it means that once the power of attorney has been signed, it's then sent to the Office of Public Guardian to be registered, and that can take a while at the moment. But once it is registered, usually you're given the certificate, and typically, you'd only use the power of attorney, obviously, once, you're obviously, you've lost capacity, you're not, for the purpose that you've created it. And in regards to, the welfare powers in particular, you'd you'd actually need a doctor to sign off on that. And but you have the option when you prepare the document that the financial powers will not require a doctor to sign off on a loss of capacity or such, but rather you can use those financial powers and have an attorney carry out those tasks for you with the power of attorney certificate. Basically, and you're still functioning well, but you might just require some extra assistance, and it also just means a few less hurdles to go over to get those rectified. So that's the decision. If you don't do that, then those financial powers will essentially be delayed until when you've got the doctor's certificate. But again, like we've said before, that's a cost benefit that needs to be weighed when we have these initial discussions, and that's also always one of the main points we discuss with the client. And it's always different on the circumstances, because when we meet a client and they're reasonably young, it might be their first will, but they decide to look to the future and get powers of attorney done at the same time. They obviously realize we don't need to use the document. It'll be handy to have there for the future, but so it might not be necessary in that time. But it also might be something that and again, it's important to have a discussion with their attorney about that, so that everyone's on the same page. But yeah.
That's fine, thank you, Angus. We talked quite a lot about powers of attorney there. We've already talked a little bit about wills before then, and we started with discharges of mortgage securities. And all three kind of flow into each other sometimes. So it's quite often the case where someone has paid off their mortgage, they've come to us to deal with tidying up their title deeds. We'll review their deeds. We'll also take the opportunity to explore whether or not the client's already got wills. If they don't, is it an appropriate time to do them now? If they already have them, this is a good chance to review them to make sure that that what's written in the will aligns with the client's wishes. And then it's also worth exploring at that point. Do you have a power of attorney in place? What does it say? Does it still reflect your wishes there as well if it ever needs to be used? So all of those tie into our optimal theme of doing a life admin MOT. And if you've got any questions about the points that have been discussed just now, you're welcome to contact us. All our contact details are on our website, middletonross.co.uk. This video is going out onto Facebook just now and Instagram, and we're also recording for YouTube, which is why our eyes have been shifting from one camera to the other at the moment. Thank you all for listening and watching, and yeah, we'd be glad to have any other questions. You know how to get in touch, and stay tuned for the next time, and we'll look forward to doing that with you again. Thank you.
Thank you.